Oh, good. Well, my question is, will you accept a caregiver tomorrow starting at 10 o'clock?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the informational webinar. We'll be getting started shortly. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and giving a little bit of time to let everyone get on, and we'll get started soon.
That's my mess.
Good afternoon,
We're
everyone.
doing- Oops, go ahead.
Welcome to the Disparity Study informational meeting for the City of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We're going to wait a couple of more minutes and let a few more people join us before we get started. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon again, and I'd like to welcome you to the informational meeting presentation for the Milwaukee, Wisconsin Disparity Study. We have quite a few people on right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. A couple of housekeeping notes. Please hold your questions until after the presentation is over. When we take questions, there should be a button for a raise hand button, but if you don't see that, you can do the thumbs up button if you have a question, or you can just kind of wave at us. And if someone is on by the phone and you're not able to indicate that you'd like to ask a question, we'll give you an opportunity at the end to just kind of speak up. My name is Michelle Clark Jenkins, and I am the project manager on this disparity study. Joining me is Omika Edmondson, who is the Deputy Project Manager, Saida Shabano, who is the Assistant Deputy Project Manager. I think, Delmarie Griffin, who's President of Griffin and Strong, our firm. And I don't see any. If any other members are there, please just give me a high sign, any of the rest of the team. Okay. So I'm going to start off with what is a disparity study. A disparity study is an objective tool that is used to determine whether a government agency has actively or passively discriminated against certain groups due to their race or gender. Sometimes these studies are also used for race neutral groups, veterans, LGBTE, and disabled groups, really used as a measure, like what kind of a benchmarking measure. But the true purpose of a disparity study is to determine whether there has been any disparities that rise to the level of discrimination based on race or gender. Discrimination, as I use that term, could very easily be the current effects of past discrimination. We don't really identify, kind of when that is, whether it's current or past. We really are looking at the outcome. To do that, we measure both statistical and anecdotal evidence, and we look at the existing policies and procedures that the city has. And the findings of our study, if the city accepts them, we expect to be implemented as policy. Could I also ask everyone to mute themselves if you're not speaking at the moment? Thank you. So we do disparity studies because there was a time when there was kind of a recognition of societal discrimination against certain race and gender groups. And so a number of governments put in place, particularly after the federal government put in place the federal DBE program, a number of state and local governments also put in place these kinds of programs. The city of Richmond, Virginia was the one who was challenged by J.A. Croce and Company. And this is really the outcome of that case, is why we do disparity studies. What the court in essence said was that even though there had been malevolent discrimination against certain groups, that if, in order to remediate that, you were also being preferential, even though it was a beneficial or benevolent preference, being preferential based on race and gender really went against the 14th Amendment. Therefore, in order to kind of get around that, you had to satisfy two prongs of what's called strict scrutiny. For anybody who's an attorney, strict scrutiny always meant strict in theory, fatal in fact. In other words, once the court said that something was strict scrutiny, you weren't really going to be able to get around it. Well, a number of attorneys kind of watched this case come up before the courts, including our CEO, Rodney Strong, and really fashioned a response to what the court said. So the court said that in order to have race, and in the case of Richmond, Virginia, it was race-based programs. Later, gender-based programs were added to this same level of scrutiny. You must have a factual basis in evidence. In other words, you kind of have to have proven the discrimination. So you have to have some sort of a compelling state interest to overcome the issues related to the 14th Amendment. The other part of it is that whatever you do as a result of these kinds of studies has to be narrowly tailored to the findings of the study to avoid over-inclusion or under-inclusion. So the way that we conduct disparity studies, our methodology is driven by case law. So although these two cases that I have up are the two Supreme Court cases, there have been dozens and dozens of cases all around the country that have kind of honed how you conduct these studies since 1989. So about our firm, we are a law and public policy consulting firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Our consulting division specializes in disparity research. As a matter of fact, it's really all we do. We believe we have the most qualified team in our industry. We have 4 attorneys, 2 PhD economists, a PhD statistician, PhD anthropologists, and all of them have expertise in disparity research, and all of them are hands-on on our studies. No study we have conducted has ever been challenged or overturned in court. That's an important point because periodically these cases do come up before the courts. And I know you all have had this kind of experience in your past. So we always take into account making sure that whatever we do is legally defensible. So I mentioned about our CEO, Griffin Strong. So he was the director of contract compliance for the City of Atlanta for 8 years. He was the principal architect of Atlanta's MWBE program, which became the model for the nation. He also was the project manager on the first post-Croson disparity study. Our principal researcher or principal investigator, Dr. Vince Egan, has done over 120 disparity studies. We keep saying that. I really think he's probably over 150 at this point. And he has successfully defended 6 studies as an expert witness. Our chief statistician, Dr. Ram Hagigi, oversaw the largest disparity study on record for the state of Texas. We have just finished a state study for the state of North Carolina and actually believe that it has probably overtaken Texas with 11 million records. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology. What does it take to conduct a disparity study? They take at least a year because all of these boxes represent the tasks involved. We will be looking at all of the city's spend over a 5-year period. And that is including all areas: construction, A&E, professional services, other services, and goods. We do a legal analysis. Again, although Supreme Court spoke quite a while ago, the circuit courts of appeal in each of the circuits sometimes have a different take or a nuanced take to the legal analysis. We'll do a policy review to see if there are any barriers to what your policies say on their face. Cleaning and collecting data is actually the largest part of the study. It takes us quite a while to both get the data and to prepare it for analysis. So each of these represent a piece of the task related to a disparity study, culminating in a final report. I'll talk a little bit about kind of each of these. So the policy review, as I mentioned, looks at your written policy to see if there are any barriers to MWBE firms. We also look to see if these policies are understood by staff, if there are any discrepancies between the policy as written or the policy as implemented, and then we look to see what policies can be modified to promote inclusion in our recommendations. Utilization is pretty straightforward. Where did the city spend their money and with whom? We look at both prime contractors and subcontractors. We disaggregate the data and the analysis by year, by various industry categories. Again, those are construction, A&E, professional services, other services, and goods. We also do a threshold analysis. We want to see what level of contracting the city's doing. Is it doing all small contracts? Is it doing large contracts? Part of that is to see whether it is viable for a lot of firms who are small firms or who have operated before only as subcontractors can begin to move over and perhaps operate as primes. It also helps us to look at sizing. Is sizing an issue? Sometimes we may hear that in anecdotal, but looking at the data and seeing what size contracts they're doing helps us to know whether there should be some unbundling. So then the other part of this disparity equation is part of it is utilization. We compare that to availability. Availability, we do a list approach, what's called a list approach. We take all of the vendors, bidders, payees, awardees, subcontractors from the city's databases. We add into that other local or state vendor and certification lists, including like your DOT DBE list. We kind of put that all in a pot and determine the unique vendors, the number of unique vendors, and that becomes our availability file. We do factor in things like capacity in order to get a true availability. So now we're doing a disparity analysis, which is a comparison between utilization and availability. It's a pretty simple equation, assuming there are 100 engineering firms in the Milwaukee area. And by the way, we do an analysis of what is our geographic marketplace. So what is the geographical boundaries of the location of firms that we are conducting? So likely we're not looking at firms who are in California. We're likely looking at firms in your economic area. And that's really that area around Milwaukee, stretching out until we see where the city has spent at least 75% of its dollars. So in comparing this, so let's say we've determined your relevant geographic marketplace, and there are 100 engineering firms, and 10 of those firms are African-American owned. So therefore we have a 10% availability. But then when we see where the city is spending its engineering dollars, and we see that 2% of its engineering dollars are going to African-American owned firms, we now have a 10% availability compared to a 2% utilization. There is a disparity between the two, thus a disparity study. We then have to test to see if that disparity between 10% and 2% is statistically significant. It is likely significant if it's 10% to 2%, but 9% to 10% may not be statistically significant. We do have one more step we have to take, which is what caused the disparity. We can't just assume that the disparity is caused by race and gender. So we test it to see if there are other factors that could explain it, like the size of the firm, how long they've been in business, the education of the owner, how many employees they have. So we test it through another number of other factors. And if what is left still represents a disparity, then we can make what Croson calls an inference of discrimination. In addition to looking at the city's own spend, we also look at whether there's discrimination in the marketplace at large. This is really an important step because if we've conducted a study, and let's say we find there are 0 Hispanic American owned engineering firms, and you use 0. So 0 exists, 0 are used, no disparity, no discrimination. We have to look past that and say, what is going on in the marketplace? Is there discrimination there? So a number of the things we look at is we look at self-employment disparities. What's the likelihood of certain race and gender groups of becoming self-employed? We also look at, is there discrimination in the credit markets? That's very impactful to having a successful business. We also look at building permit data, because that tells us who's out there in the public who are doing construction projects. We then also look at, we collect anecdotal evidence. So on top of kind of the statistical stuff, we really need to kind of hear what the story is, what's going on, what works, what doesn't work, what's been your experience. The biggest question for all of these anecdotal methods is, what has been your experience doing business with the city of Milwaukee? And if you have tried to do business with them, and if you haven't tried, why not? So all of these kind of get at that same question in various ways. This informational meeting at the end, when we ask for questions, we're sure that we'll hear some information from you all today. We do individual anecdotal interviews, which are more like case studies. We do a survey of business owners to the broadest group of business owners that we can find. We conduct public hearings where people go on the record to state their experiences. We do focus groups, which demonstrate kind of the interaction amongst firms. We interview and get involved with local civic and trade organizations. As a matter of fact, if any of you are members of such organizations that you think that we should get involved with, please put it in the chat room, the name of the organization, so we can contact them. That's very important because the organizations do two things. One is they become tentacles in the community. There are a number of minority women-owned firms who may not show up on any of the lists we have. And so the organizations help us to reach a lot of firms who can be included in giving us their feedback. And then ultimately, email. If you can't attend any of these other things, and some of these are randomly selected, so if you're not selected to participate in anything, then you can always send us an email message. So at the end of this, we summarize our findings. We then provide recommendations. We have done studies all over the country, so we're familiar with best practices. We also now have become semi-experts in what's going on in your community, because hopefully by this time we've talked to 500 or 1,000 or more firms in your area and gotten kind of a quantitative spin on, you know, what's going on and how things can be fixed if there's anything wrong. I mean, we have gone into jurisdictions where people have told us that everything's great, that the jurisdiction reaches out to them, they keep them abreast, they're transparent, you know, so we want to hear good news as well as just places and opportunities for improvement. So we make these recommendations. First, we are required under Croson to first consider race and gender neutral remedies if we find a disparity. Once we've tested that, we can then move on to race and gender conscious remedies. And we really do try to make unique recommendations to you that will fit what's going on in Milwaukee and fits the firms there. So after the study's over, we'll work with the city to release the study. And then implementation is really key. You know, we don't ever want to see our studies sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust. The idea is that they trigger activity and an action to improve whatever the city's currently doing. So we will stick around long enough to assist the city with kind of creating a path forward on how to address and implement the recommendations we've made. So how can you all as the public get involved? If you are contacted for an anecdotal interview or sent a survey of business owners or asked to be involved in a focus group, please say yes and please show up. That's one of the most helpful things you can do. What you say to us truly turns into policy. So you have a unique opportunity here. The public hearings will probably be later. They tend to be later. They'll probably be at the end. My guess is they'll be at the end of the year sometime. Please attend those and provide your input. You can also email your comments to us at milwaukeestudy@gspclaw.com, and we will put that in the chat room as well. If you're not contacted for anything, or if you have a question or you have a comment you want to make by email, you're welcome to do that. You can stay involved. We are active on social media. We also have a website, which I'm happy to say is live. So please go visit milwaukeedisparitystudy.com for information about upcoming meetings and kind of where the study is. So this is the project arc, our timetable. We're just really getting started now. And in the spring, we'll be moving on to this informational meeting is really part of the spring. This summer, we'll be doing the surveys. And then come fall and winter, we'll be working on the actual analysis and study findings. It'll probably take 6 months or so for us to both collect and clean data. So again, that's the longest process. So it'll be about this time next year when we'll finish the study. So now we're open to any questions or any comments you might have. If you'll raise your hand. No questions?
Yes, there is a question. Hi, how are you? I'm Jessie Leonard, resident of Milwaukee. I've been in the supply diversity space for a while. Currently working now with the Women in Business Development Center, and that's under WeBank, if you're familiar with them. But my question is my understanding is that this is the beginning stages of the disparity study, right? And you're looking for support and participation from us as either business owners or organizations, and you're hoping to get some contact information. And so I think I saw in there when you talk about gender neutral, does that also include a study on women business owners in Milwaukee, and does it reach out to be more inclusive of the state of Wisconsin? Was that a lot?
Okay, wait, I'm not sure I got the last. So yes, we do look at, we are looking at women. So there is an issue in terms of, I'm not sure if you're asking this question, but I'm going to answer it for you anyway, which is ethnicity kind of trumps gender. So we're looking at firms by ethnicity, and then the women are only non-minority women. And part of that is because really most times the data doesn't exist for us to disaggregate the data by race and gender. If it does exist, we'll take a look at it, but it generally doesn't exist for us to include minority or ethnic women in the women category. So generally the women are going to be non-minority women.
Okay, got
and then the study is focused on the spend and on the activities and on the behavior of the city of Milwaukee, except that private sector analysis that I talked about is a much broader view. It won't look at the whole state of Wisconsin, but it'll look at that relevant market area that we're going to do, which many times winds up being the MSA or the CSA around Milwaukee.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Claudia Garcia. I have a question for Milwaukee Public Schools. My question is, for the disparity study, are we going back X amount of years? Or because due to COVID, I understand that many businesses may not have been the opportunity or had the opportunity to go ahead and bid on projects or proposals that may have come around. But are we going back like 5 years, 6 years? I don't recall if you've been to that or not.
Yes, we're going back 5 years into the data. So it will all be really most of it will be pre-COVID.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask, Omika, are you on? Does the study include 2020?
Yes, I'm on. What was your question, Michelle?
Does the study include 2020?
I can find out for you in just a few seconds.
Okay, if you will. Yeah, COVID has had obviously a big impact over this last year. Even some businesses may not exist, but really a disparity study is a historical viewpoint that really sets a guideline for moving forward in the future. So yeah, it isn't a current review other than the fact that there's current data that is used. So availability, we're using historical and current availability. We are also using, of course, we're interviewing firms currently, and my guess is we'll hear from firms who have been affected by COVID. And so I don't think that the impact of COVID, it can be avoided, that the impact of COVID is not going to make its way into the study in terms of how we comment. I see Andres Lozama.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering, in this study, I would understand that there's certain percentages that the city is trying to utilize for minority businesses. One of the questions I have, if there is a way to study the overall treatment that the city has towards these firms. The situations that we've had have been pretty negative. So we would have contracts that were awarded to us. We have the most outstanding balances that we have are over a year, and they're from the city of Milwaukee, which is ironic. If we were given that as a result of some kind of a small business or a minority business a percentage, we would be better off not taking the work. And it's been repetitious. So I don't know if that's something that is going to be part of the study or not.
So yeah, it is. I mean, that's where our anecdotal comes in, just like you just told us that's going to make it into the study. Again, we kind of look at all these subjects that come up. So you brought up an area of concern. What's really interesting, and the ones we really kind of seize on, is when we hear the same things over and over and over again. Anecdotal evidence many times is taken as, well, that's one person's opinion. And that's true until that's now 200 firm owner opinions. So if we hear it once, it does carry less weight than when we hear it over and over and over and over again. So yes, what you tell us is important. As a matter of fact, it's critical to the kinds of recommendations we make. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a majority. I mean, think of this: if someone came to you and you had 100 people and even 10 of them complained about the same thing, that is something that you still need to take a look at. I mean, clearly, if 60 of them complained about something, those would become urgent issues. But even small percentages, when they bring up certain issues, are things that they may not be major recommendations we make, but you'll see language like, please review this because we did hear a particular issue come up over and over again. So it's very important for you to voice this. I'll also tell you that except for the public hearings and today, which is public, what we do with the rest of it is we are as anonymous as we can be. And what I mean by that is we do not use names in our study. We may quote you, but you'll be like A1A told us this. So we kind of code your names, and we, even when we quote you, the only time we have to reveal your name is if there's some kind of litigation and we're required to do that, or if the city says we want to know who participated, and we probably fight the city a little on that one. So generally it's pretty anonymous because we want you to be able to be candid with us.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer the question.
You're welcome.
Very much appreciated. The overall concept of trying to help small minority and small minority businesses.
You've kind of dropped out. We've lost you a little bit. Can you get closer maybe to your mic?
Can you hear me okay?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. No, the overall concept of trying to promote small minority businesses, women businesses is great, but if they're being awarded these contracts and then it ends up in a financial hardship for them, it's counterproductive. And that's the experience that we've had over the past year and a half. So thank you so much for answering the question.
Okay, you're welcome. I see Jorge Franco.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Pleasure to meet you here by Zoom. Ms. Jenkins, I serve as the Chief Executive of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in Wisconsin. And you may already know this, but here in Milwaukee, we've been through this once before with a disparity study that ended up in race-based preferences that allocated certain percentages of goals for one particular group, and that became a disadvantage to other minority groups. Are you familiar with that? Is that something you're aware of?
So we're aware that there had been a study done before and that there were certain goals put in place and that program in essence was overturned.
Thank you. Yeah, that's my question. And so we sued the city and overturned that particular effort because of the race disadvantages that it created. We understand the spirit of what is at hand here now and have a great deal of experience in navigating through these issues. Is it your anticipation that we would somehow end up back with race-based preferences within minority groups that would ultimately again set up a disadvantage to other minority groups? Or is there a way through the disparity study process that we could together arrive upon a solution that enhances the landscape, if you will, in procurement and contracting and so on for all minority groups in a manner where the group as a whole, is greater than the sum of its parts, in how we end up with outcomes that favor all minority groups as opposed to disadvantaging one over another?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So I'll try not to give you too long of an answer. I know exactly what you're talking about, what you're saying. And again, I'm not so familiar with what particularly happened here in Milwaukee. I am familiar with how these are dealt with across the country, but what you're really talking about is, and again, we don't have an ultimate understanding in any way of what's the outcomes are going to be or what our recommendations were going to be. But what has happened in jurisdictions is that you do a disparity study, and disparity studies are done separating out ethnicity and gender. So we're studying African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, Native Americans, non-minority females, as compared to all of those things. So if the outcome of our study demonstrates that one ethnic group, let's talk about just the minority groups, but there is one minority group that we prove that there's discrimination for that minority group, but not for another minority group. And then you put in race-based goals, the PROSIN does not allow you generally to include groups that are not deemed to be, where you have not found these disparity or this discrimination, to utilize them in a robust race and gender conscious program because you haven't found anything wrong. There are lots of different things you do to test that. One is if there has been a program in place of any sort, has that program itself had an effect on the fact that there's an inequity between the utilization? But let's say there's no program and you come out and you've done these studies. Then I agree with you. We don't want to see a revolving door. And it's not so much of well, benefiting one group over the other. It's saying one group has had a deep disparity. Maybe another group is overutilized or utilized to the extent without having a program. However, what you also find is that, let's say we have one group who we put in a program and another group we leave out. When we come back in a couple of years, you're going to see one group flatlined because if they're not in the program, nobody uses them. So now you have this revolving door of one group is got great numbers and one group doesn't have great numbers. So you leave one group out of the program and then you come back and that group now is flatlined because nobody's using them. So yeah, we do address that issue. It's not our intent to make recommendations that are going to disadvantaged every group. The idea is that we're trying to put in remediation that helps all of the groups to maintain or increase their participation. So I can't tell you today what our outcomes are or how we'll deal with them, but the issue that you're bringing up, which is to have one group disadvantaged by another group, that we're not in favor of seeing, and we would craft programs to keep that from happening.
So the seesaw process that you just described that can happen when something is implemented that is race-based and how that resonates for years to come is precisely what would be our concern, as well, as you've just acknowledged and underscored in your statement. And to that end, we would be eager to work together with you. And we're deeply familiar. We have econometric modeling expertise. We have a very strong bench of experts that are participants in what we do. But we'd be eager to, as this works through its process, arrive upon together a set of recommendations for the city of Milwaukee that strike a balance, do not racially disparage any particular minority group. We know firsthand, and we can get into examples a whole nother day, racism is alive and strong, and it happens. There's significant disadvantages that occur as a result of many behaviors. But we'd be eager to arrive upon a balance point that enables us working together to strike a balance with an outcome and make recommendations to the city that enable that balance to occur, whereas the minority economy, if you will, because after all, we are a minority majority in Milwaukee, but where the minority population as a whole adds much more strength in the economy locally here by putting folks to work and helping minority businesses truly be successful. Capacity building is a major factor in this particular arena, and I'd be eager to hear perhaps another day, and maybe we can talk offline as to what you've done in the capacity building arena, because that really is a way to help level the minority playing field, if you will, when there's a particular group that's maybe lagging behind another for many reasons that are very complex, but certainly something that's resolvable and helpable in terms of the situation and bringing balance back, so that one race-based group does not end up disfavoring other race-based groups in the outcomes. So we're eager to get to those outcomes with you, working together, and happy to talk more about that.
So I don't want to give a misunderstanding here that all ethnic groups are going to be treated equally, because at the end of the day, this analysis does point to, and again, no idea what it's going to say, but we'll point to certain groups that may need more assistance than others. And it just really depends on what we see in the outcome. But again, what we recommend ultimately is not going to be put in place. We're very sensitive to the fact of a yo-yo effect, and we try to craft these programs so we don't see that. But that doesn't mean that all groups are treated equally. But I will say this, we generally, if there is going to be a race and gender-based remedy recommended, we usually will, for those groups that can be a part of that, we would not be favorable in putting in place any individual ethnic goals. In other words, we see race as an issue and gender as an issue. So we would recommend, if there's going to be goals, an MBE goal and a separate WBE goal, if there is going to be such a thing. In other words, it would be a combined minority goal. as opposed to, well, we have an African-American goal and we have a Hispanic American goal and we have an Asian American goal. In terms of administrating a program, that would be almost impossible to administer, first of all.
Not to mention,
And they don't work that way.
Not-
It doesn't work that way.
not to mention the litigation that evolves as a result of that. So I welcome that comment and welcome the opportunity to discuss this more deeply so as to arrive upon some great results and outcomes here as we all move forward.
Yeah. So again, we're just starting this process. We don't know where we are yet. It'll be quite a while before we get to that area, but you know, we'll see where we come out at the end of this.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jenkins.
You're welcome.
Before you move on, Michelle, I'd encourage you, George, Franco, and any others who are involved today and later on. I've put the dedicated disparity study email as well as the dedicated disparity study website in the chat for anyone who may have questions and may not want to ask in this public forum, or if you want to speak further offline, please, we welcome all that in our dedicated disparity study email as well as additional follow-up.
And for the organizations, we will be reaching out to you. Feel free to reach out to us to have these one-on-one conversations, both as the organization and also to help us reach your membership. Omika, were you able to determine whether 2020 was part of our study?
Yes, so 2020, I don't see it as part of the fiscal years, Michelle.
Okay, all right, so it ends in 2019.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? I see in the chat room, will econometric analysis be done in addition to the availability versus utilization test? So who's that? Talis Shelbourne?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Tell me what you mean by an econometric analysis. We are conducting a regression analysis. We are doing, there's a whole chapter on on the private sector analysis, which is all econometrics, but I'm not sure which econometric analysis you mean.
yeah, that's typically included in econometric analysis. When I reached out to Dr. Myers and I was asking him some of the key components of disparity studies, and that was mentioned as one. From my understanding, there's theoretical and applied, and I didn't know which one was being conducted. I also didn't know if there would be any theory attached to, in terms of how that'll transfer over to whatever recommendations are made. So that's what I was asking.
Yeah, so our senior economist, Dr. Price, is a compadre, let me put it that way, is to Dr. Meyer. And so he's an applied theorist in terms of his econometric style. So yes, absolutely. Absolutely, we will have some econometric measures, which include regression analysis. Regina Flores asks, can you clarify what spend will be analyzed? For example, will this include only competitive procurements, or will you also include sole source and cooperative trends and spends? It is everything. So we are not paying attention so much to the type of procurement it was. We're looking at all procurements, not just whether it's been deemed competitive. So that includes sole source, it includes cooperative. Wherever the money was spent, that's what we're chasing. Let's see. I see another question.
I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Okay, no more questions in the chat. Do I have any more questions?
Yes.
Just one last question, Ms. Jenkins, on this end. This is Jorge Franco, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Is the PowerPoint available? Will you make that available? And also the recording of I noticed you're recording today's session. Is that available as well?
Yeah, it'll be posted on the website as soon as we can get it posted between, I
Excellent.
guess, today and tomorrow.
Thank you.
So this is Jessie again, and I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
With the kind of study that you're doing, and I heard you mention that it will also include professionals services and use of diverse suppliers in any category. So my question is, historically, after doing one of these studies, have you seen an increase of utilization for diverse suppliers on the professional side? Because I know that a lot of activity happens on the construction side, but there's still a lot left to be desired when it comes to professional services.
So again, that kind of depends on where we are. But I agree with you. There are a lot of jurisdictions we go into where we see little, well, one, we see little or no subcontracting in professional services. And when I say professional services, I'm thinking both other professional services as well as construction related professional services. So a lot of times in professional services, you don't see very much contracting, but then on the prime side, firms have a very difficult time getting in. So we do kind of pay a little close attention to professional services because it's an area that can get lost in terms of participation. And it's interesting to me because some jurisdictions, professional services will be the place they're doing great. Like they're not doing so great in the other areas, but all of a sudden we've got these really high numbers in professional services because they use professional services as a way to utilize minority and women-owned firms. But then we go other places, and again, professional services is like flatline. So we do pay attention as we look at each of these groups. So when we look at professional services and we see there's some sort of a depressed utilization of minority and women, we do put our eyes on that. And whether we see an increase or not isn't really based on our study. It's based on what the jurisdiction does with it. So there's a place in which we hand off the work we do to your legislators and to your staff, and then they determine how they're going to implement and how this is going to move forward. We know that the things that we recommend will work, but there are a lot of factors that go into whether it actually sees results or not. One, of course, is the will of the governing body to have it work. The other is your will and how much you kind of stay on top of them and hold them accountable. There are also other circumstances. You know, COVID is difficult, and we gotta, we go in and do these studies, and one of the first things we usually recommend is the first recommendation you're likely to see. It's the one preview I can give you to our outcome is resources and staffing. So whatever else we recommend, we got to stop at the very beginning and say, do you have the resources? Are you willing to put aside the resources and the staffing necessary to carry this out? Because we can recommend wonderful programs that will work, but if you have no one to carry them out, or you've got one person who's got a shared responsibility and isn't really focused on this work, or doesn't have the experience to do this work, or you want a full race and gender-based program, but yet you have a half of an FTE to do it, that doesn't make sense to even start down that road. And COVID has, for some of the jurisdictions we've worked with, one of the things we have to work through with them is what can they do when some of them are having a difficult time holding on to their existing staff, let alone us telling them they need to hire 3 more people to start a program. So there's a realism involved in this, which is what can they do first? And that will be the most impactful. So it may not be that they're doing all, 6 or 12 recommendations we make. They may start with one until they're able to increase one. The other thing is, it's where we fall on the budgetary calendar. So that's a difficult thing too. If we finish a study and it's and budgets don't come up for new staff for 8 months or 10 months, or we've just missed the budgeting part, So we do try and work with that too, is that if we see that there are certain things we know, no matter what the outcome is, because even if we find no disparity, that doesn't mean that we're not going to say, well, at the same time, here's a way you can maintain or institutionalize to make sure that you have, full participation. There are lots of race neutral things you can do that I think are very effective to help you even to maintain what your participation is, if it's great participation. And so we say, well, listen, you still need somebody to monitor. You still need somebody to do this. And if they know that ahead of time, they perhaps can put it in to their budgets. We just worked with a county in North Carolina, and they knew ahead of time. And 2 months before we finished the study, they had an approval for an additional FTE on top of the staff they already had, just telegraphing the fact that they knew they wanted to do something and wanted to make sure they had some staff, whatever we recommended.
Great, thank you. And I'm glad you pointed out, having the proper staff in place, because one person can't do all of that lifting by themselves, but certainly do try. The other thing that I thought about while you were speaking is I did hear that you mentioned something about looking at how contracts are bundled or unbundling. My question is, does it also address change orders that typically happens? Because oftentimes a lot of business opportunities are missed or lost as a result of a change order, right?
So there are two ways. So utilization, which is where did you spend your money and with whom and how much. Utilization can be measured a couple of ways, and we won't know till we get into the data, which is the best data to use. So if you use payment data, there's no question, of course, it's much more accurate. It tells you exactly who you wrote a check to, and then hopefully who they wrote a check to. So you don't have to worry about change orders as much when you're doing with payment data. But when we're dealing with award data, which even if we do utilization through payment data, we also want to see award data, because that tells us the decision making. What did I decide to give someone? It's $1 million contract. Whereas in payment data, it's difficult for us to see whether somebody got, $10,000 projects, or whether they got one $100,000 project, because we just see the payments. So in measuring through the threshold analysis, we do get everything. Matter of fact, we kind of painstakingly say, well, if we're looking at a PO, does that reflect any change orders? If it doesn't, where are we going to find the change orders? So yeah, we try to be as accurate as possible. Has something been modified? Was it canceled? Did it get amendments to it? So yeah, we gather all of that in terms of the data analysis.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. More questions? Oh, I got somebody in the chat room.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from Regina.
Does this mean the city has a decentralized purchasing process? Oh, yes, absolutely it does. Very decentralized. And so, but that's, there's nothing I said, I don't think, that indicates a decentralized process. But in fact, the city does have a decentralized process. That just means we have to gather data from more places. That's all. Any other questions, comments?
I did have one more question. Will there be, I know you said after you'll be there long enough to see, or to give the recommendations, will there be any follow-up or any kind of periodic monitoring, or is that not something that you guys are in, talks to do?
So right now we're just under contract to conduct the study, and then I'm sure the city will determine whether they need our services any further after that, or whether they want to use us, or have anybody else come in and take an independent review. But I will tell you, studies only last but so long. So one of the things that came out of Croson is that these are supposed to be remedial programs. So they're supposed to be fixing something. And so after a period of time, they have to sunset, first of all. So any program, race or gender conscious program that's put into place has to have a sunset date. It can't just go on forever. So that's kind of your period. At least that's one periodic check-in. And at the end of that period, it would expire, or there'd be a new study done. That generally new studies are done every 5 years or so, kind of on the outliers, kind of 7 years, just because these programs can't last forever. Like I said, they're supposed to fix something, although there are a number of jurisdictions that have had these programs for 30 years, and they still need them. More questions? Any more? Okay. All right, going once. Okay, well, of course, if you have any more questions, you're welcome to email us and provide your questions. We're happy to answer them that way as well. Again, we're really thankful for you all joining us. This was a great group. It just tells us one of the things we know when we get really good participation from the beginning is that we've got a lively group in front of us. So we're happy to meet some of you again along the way as we're doing interviews, and hopefully you'll stay engaged with us. So on behalf of Griffin and Strong, I want to thank you all for your involvement, and we'll be talking to you soon. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.